He, the host of Around the Political World with John Rothmann. Hello, sir. Thank you for being with us. There's a lot going on. I will ask you to weigh in first on what's happening at the Supreme Court. I was touching on the Clarence Thomas lack of recusal. And
I was listening. I listened to your show.
The obvious nature of a conflict here.
Of course, there's a conflict, but understand that Supreme Court justices can only recuse themselves. That is to say, there is no code or ethical standard. So unless a Supreme Court justice, and we have one classic example, and that was William Rehnquist in the United States versus Richard Nixon, who knew all the people in the Justice Department and said, I am recusing myself on the question of the tapes because these are all people I've worked with and that I know. Clarence Thomas has chosen a different path, and there is nothing that can be done to discipline him. He absolutely has that right. That is the right of every Supreme Court justice to determine whether to recuse themselves or not.
I have to deal with something quickly, John. Excuse me. Pardon me for this. Albert, could you please respond to this? Mo is saying, your volume level to the output mix is very low, Mark. The total solution audio output is fine with Albert being very blasty. So you're hot, Albert. I'm low, but the overall volume is fine. Can we address this in some way, Albert?
Because I'll adjust my mic level right now.
I'm going to adjust.
If I can quote, please, the Three Bears. As long as I'm just right, that's all.
Yes, I think Rothman is fine.
I've been writing Rothman's level. I can't hear myself in playback, but I adjusted yours as well.
Okay, and I turned myself up a little bit. I'm hoping that we'll check in with listeners and hope that this addresses in part that question. Now, back to the fact that you just shared with us, which is that essentially there is nothing that forces a member of the Supreme Court, a justice, there is nothing that forces a justice to recuse him or herself.
Exactly. That is precisely correct.
And there's no guardrail on that. So this is outrageous, though, is it not?
Well, look, it's very clear that Clarence Thomas has a conflict of interest. His wife, Ginny, has been deeply involved, as you rightly pointed out, in the January 6th insurrection. So, of course, there's a conflict, and there is still no requirement, even if it's self-evident, there is no rule that requires recusal. And by the way, a Supreme Court justice can sit as long as they choose to, unless they're dead or resign. You can even sit in ill health. I'd remind you, William O. Douglas had several strokes and remained on the court, even though his health was clearly impaired. So there is no discipline or rule for that branch of government.
Is there any incentive for Congress to change that, John?
It's a very interesting question. I don't know that Congress can regulate another branch of government any more than another branch of government can regulate any other branch. I think we need to understand the issues here. It's not just Thomas, it's Sam Alito, who clearly has his proclivities as well. But the argument could have been made and was made against Earl Warren and members of the liberal so-called Warren Court that they had already made up their minds. But that's the way the Supreme Court is structured. And by and large, it has worked through the centuries.
No, the Supreme Court, you just made me think of it, is, as you know, undercutting the power. They'll do it based on jurisdictional decision-making. That is to say, they're going to decide that you don't have the jurisdiction, the EPA, to control various toxic chemicals. And the same is true of consumer protections. They're going to rule that there's not sufficient standing.
That is the power of the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
and that's why, if I may be so bold, who is president matters. Remember that Donald Trump, prior to his election as president, announced that he was going to nominate justices for the court who would rescind Roe v. Wade. And he did. And the American people made a choice. Now, they may know that choice was incorrect, and I think that will be a central issue in the campaign of 2024.
Well, most certainly. I mean, you're seeing now states beginning to put these draconian anti-abortion and anti-women's choice, anti-choice, however you want to say it. These draconian laws are in place, and it's a remarkable thing that this country is is seeing itself rolled back in terms of laws by, what
Yeah,
might be 100 years.
let me just point out that's your political position and my political position. Others would say that the law passed in Arizona in 1864 when Abraham Lincoln was president and running for re-election against General McClellan, that law dealing with an absolute ban on abortion except to save the life of the mother, it should be the law of the land. And I would remind you that that was the position of many key Republicans, including Kerry Lake, in the state of Arizona. And I would remind you now that although there are some calls to rescind that law, that the Republicans are having a hard time getting the votes to do it. So these are all factors in the way we work. That is part of the success and failure of our American political system.
It's interesting because you talk about the effect, and there it is, abortion policy to influence election. I was running through the poll results yesterday of a New York Times Siena poll, and someone was commenting in the comments that I like polls too much. But this is a poll about what things are priorities. It's not a poll about how you're going to vote. And they had a pretty solid sample size. As I recall, it was around 1,200. Might have been, and their original sample size was much bigger. It was over 100,000 to get to these people who they wanted. And it was done on cell phones. But anyway, the abortion issue, which I thought would rank quite high, the ability of women to control their own body, actually didn't even make the top three. It was
I don't believe
remarkable.
it. I don't believe it, Mark, not for a millisecond. You understand that there have been 7 states that have voted on this issue, and in each state, which are theoretically states that would want a tighter abortion restriction, it was voted down. The same thing will happen in Arizona, I can assure you, and I can even see in a state like Alabama, where there is now a revolutionary response to it. So these issues also are highlighted by the momentary headline, and I think we're going to see that. But by the way, I don't know if you saw the Biden commercial. Maybe we can pull it up and show it about a young woman who nearly lost her life because of the rescission of Roe v. Wade. I must tell you, I love political ads. There's something called the Living Room Candidate, which takes us back to 1952. You can watch a whole panoply of ads. But this ad produced by the Biden campaign is one of the most effective, powerful, compelling ads that I've seen. And basically it says, if you put Trump back in the White House, you'll see even tighter restrictions. And but the woman who gave the testimony is the woman who nearly died because of the rescission of Roe v. Wade.
I saw the ad. It is very powerful indeed. Let me get you to the Middle East, sir.
Wait. Before you do that, can we talk about the fact that at this very moment in the United States Senate, there is a trial taking place.
The Mayorkas trial?
And this is a critical moment because the Republicans, and I want everybody to understand this could have been avoided had the Republicans voted for the very bill which was proposed by a bipartisan group of senators. Mayorkas' response is, I'm not responsible for what happens on the border. I'm the secretary, but I'm not responsible. And the Republicans are trying to use this as a political club, if you will, in the election. The impeachment of Mayorkas is absurd. It's the first time in more than 100 years that a cabinet officer has been formally impeached by the House of Representatives. And the Republicans, and I listened particularly to Senator Lee and Senator Cruz, demanding a full trial. And they're making the presentations. I'm with you now, but if I weren't, I'd be listening. I think they're the ones who are making the argument now on the floor of the Senate. This is a complete misuse of impeachment. Did you see this morning senators being required now to sign in and take a separate oath on impeachment, which is the standard process? So I'm only pointing out, you have Mayorkas up there. That's great. You can disagree with the policies on the border of Joe Biden, but to impeach Mayorkas for what? He's the secretary, for God's sake. He's not the chief enforcer. If you want to go after somebody on this, they ought to go after Joe Biden. And by the way, please note the impeachment thrust against Joe Biden has fallen flat. Even Republicans understand the absurdity of it. So this is part of the political process that should and is profoundly disturbing to all of us.
Schumer posted, let's not kid ourselves about what's going on today. The impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas has nothing to do with high crimes and misdemeanors and everything to do with helping Donald Trump on the campaign trail. It's beneath the dignity of the Senate to entertain this nakedly partisan exercise. Impeachment should never be used to settle policy disagreements. That would set a disastrous precedent for the Congress and could throw our system of checks and balances into endless cycles of chaos. But of course, to whatever degree there is chaos, and to whatever degree there are problems for the Biden administration, it serves their master. That's Donald Trump. And in fact, this was really brought with the urging of Donald Trump, just as, and this is the ridiculous thing and the irony of this, as the Republicans voted down those things that would have been likely one of the most revolutionary, transformative border bills that had ever passed Congress. You would have seen many more in the way of immigration judges. You would have seen
Exactly
much,
right.
much
You're
more
right.
money flowing to the
100%.
border. So and again, and the reason that was voted down was at the behest of Donald Trump. It
Exactly.
was for political reasons.
And the Democrats need to make this a major issue. The other great issue domestically that we're going to deal with is the vote in the House of Representatives on removing Speaker Johnson from the chair. If he is saved, it will only be because of Democrats who will stand with him. And the fact of the matter is, the Republicans have proven brilliantly their inability to be a responsible political party in control of the House of Representatives. Speaker Johnson is going to bring up the Ukraine aid bill, the Israel aid bill, the bill for Taiwan, and some border aspects, all as separate pieces of legislation, because that is what the Freedom Caucus is insisting on. And all I can tell you is this is one of the most disgraceful moments in the history of the House of Representatives. And may I be clear, if the Democrats had pulled this, I would feel just as passionately. This is not a partisan issue. The job of the Speaker of the House is to run the House of Representatives in an able fashion. And I'll give Johnson credit on this. He has tried to do that, even though I disagree with him on everything. But the question becomes now whether Marjorie Taylor Greens and the others in the Freedom Caucus will be able to dislodge him as Speaker of the House. By the way, Johnson said he will not resign. So if they're going to get rid of him, they're going to have a vote.
And as you say, the Democrats may save him. What a bizarre time we live in. Now to the Middle East.
Yes.
Israel faces. Well, first of all, I want to ask you something because I made sort of what I thought was a kind of bold statement the other day, as there's a lot of hand-wringing over, and I understand why there's hand-wringing over what Israel is going to do, and over this attack from Iran that was provoked by the attack on the embassy in Syria. And I suggested, and I want to know whether you agree with this, that the kind of attack from Iran that was produced, I don't want to soft sell it completely, but you've given Israel hours and hours to prepare. There were intercepts of these various missiles and drones from not only Israel, but the U.S., Jordan, et cetera. And there was plenty of time essentially to dodge what I thought felt to me as though it was a performative, obligatory for the Iranian street attack on Israel. So I'm wondering if you, A, agree with that, and B, if that's true, you can tell me why Israel would make another move now. I mean, isn't that just an escalation for Israel to make another move?
Let's remember that over 300 missiles and drones were fired at Israel. I've had the opportunity this morning to see by video some of the missiles. If any one of them had hit, it would have been an unmitigated disaster for the Israelis. I had friends in Israel. I have friends in Israel who sent me the images of their being held in their safe rooms, whole groups of people. The whole schedule of education in Israel was canceled because of fear that what the implications would be of these bombings. We are lucky that the United States, Great Britain, France, Jordan, and yes, even Saudi Arabia decided that Iran represented a major threat. Will the Israelis respond? You bet they will. Can you imagine if 300 rockets, missiles, drones were fired at Washington, D.C., even if you took down every single one of them, there would still be an action. Now, the Israelis are trying to act responsibly, but you understand the goal of Iran, and they've made it clear in all their statements, is the total destruction of Israel, period. And so the Israelis understand what an existential threat is. What is interesting to me is the nuclear program in Iran, which continues to progress. I was frankly worried that they might use a modified nuclear weapon in such an attack. Thank God they didn't. But you understand that if one Hiroshima or Nagasaki type bomb hit Tel Aviv, half of the population of Israel would be destroyed. The Israelis are certainly going to respond, and the world certainly has to understand if any nation were attacked as Israel was attacked, they would have the right to respond. The problem in Israel is how do you calibrate it? Because the last thing the Israelis want is a regional war. But what was interesting to me, most significant of all, is that President Biden stood solidly with Israel, said he had Israel's back, and the United States remains firmly committed to the survival and the territorial integrity of the nation of Israel. And that is a critical statement by this president in an election year.
Mark, you're wrong. The ICBMs from Iran got there within 10 minutes.
That's correct. The ICBMs were within 10 minutes. And although, let me be clear, Mark, of course Israel had time to prepare. They had to have time to prepare. And the United States had to have time to prepare. But the existential threat to the existence of Israel is clear. And imagine, Mark, if Israel did not have the air defense system that it has. Imagine if the United States had not stepped up, if Great Britain and France and Jordan and Saudi Arabia had not stepped up, why the Israelis would have been in a disastrous situation, and you would have seen an even broader escalation. But everybody
I want to explore this with you, though, because sure. I am saying, and I want you to set me straight or whatever, I'm saying that this seemed to be choreographed by Iran so that they could fire for the first time inside Israel, so that sends an immense message. But there were hours before any missiles were launched. So this idea that it took 10 minutes, they hit them one time, maybe the ICBM was launched and it took 10 minutes to get there, but they had hours before they launched it. I mean, Israel
is on permanent alert. Do you understand? They didn't need 10 minutes. They're on permanent alert.
That's just not. I mean, I get the spirit with which we make that point, but yeah. You know what there's permanent alert and vigilance, and then there's real alert where people are in their bomb shelters, and it's the latter that was going on that night in Israel. So what I'm saying is that was because they had warning from Iran. They knew that this was going to happen, didn't they?
Yes, of course they knew, and we know that Israel in some way is going to have to respond. What is the real danger in all of this is, what if the air defense hadn't worked? What if the United States, Britain, France, and the others had not participated? How could Israel have fended off 300 separate attacks, including ICBMs, including drones, and who knows what kind of weapons Iran might have used? I'm not hysterical. I'm just logical. I'm very clear about this. The intent of Iran is to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The danger that Israel faces is that if ever Iran had that capability and felt confident of that capability, they might do it. Now, there is a check on this, and the check is that the Iranians know that Israel also has the ability to respond mightily. And I think that the mullahs are more interested in their own survival than they are in destroying Israel. So to that degree, we just need to understand, thank God the United States and Israel and Great Britain and France and Jordan. By the way, you do know that Iran is now threatening Jordan. They're threatening to destabilize the king.
Well, this is the other thing I wanted to get to, and I will get to you this question. I want to just say, Phineas, Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis are still at war with Israel. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Phineas, because the reality is if Iran really wanted to strike within Israel suddenly and without warning, they could have gotten Hezbollah to do it. I mean, they have proxies in the region and powerful proxies in the region so that they could have done real damage inside Israel if they wanted to.
And they still could.
And they still could. Now, I want to talk about Iran quickly and their relationship. I was making the point the other day. I mean, they don't even speak Arabic in Iran. They speak Farsi. I mean, it's not an Arab country per se, and because
it's a Muslim country.
It's a Muslim country.
Muslim coalition.
And as a Shiite Muslim country, Tell me how they fit in the puzzle pieces of the Middle East, and why,
Well,
as you suggest, that there are alliances there that just won't happen.
the Sunnis, and those are our allies. That's Jordan, that's Saudi Arabia, that's Egypt. Those are the so-called moderate Arab countries, are deathly afraid of Iran because Iran would like to destroy them as well. So there is an old expression: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is the prevailing view now between Sunni and Shia. Most Americans are not sophisticated enough politically in the Middle East to understand that differential, but it's important to understand it. It doesn't obviate the fact that there is a consensus in the Muslim community, Shiite and Sunni, that ideally they'd like Israel to vanish. But one of the reasons that Hamas did what it did when it did it was to prevent Saudi Arabia from entering into a de facto relationship with the Israelis. However, you will note in this crisis that Saudi Arabia granted Israel even the need and the right to use their airspace to defend themselves. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
That's the coin of the realm in the Middle East. Hey, you know what's happening at USC? They just canceled this valedictory
They
speech
sure
from
did.
yeah from
Now, the
a.
reason is not because she doesn't have free speech,
Let
but
me just tell
because
everybody what happened.
in social
Valedict.
media,
Go ahead.
she 5 years ago made a post condemning Zionism and challenging the right of Israel to exist as a nation. And so it wasn't a question of her free speech. It's the same question, by the way. There's a hearing in Congress taking place even as we speak on this question of the rising Jew hatred. Now, let me be clear. People have a right to criticize Israel. People have a right to criticize Zionism. They have a right to express freely what they want to say. What USC is saying is she has the right to express it, but not in a valedictory speech where she has to address the needs of all students. That, by the way, is completely consistent with the policy of not only USC, but many major American universities. But understand that we have had 3 university presidents who have had to resign, high profile cases, including Harvard University, because they wouldn't condemn hatred of Jews. So this is something that has to be clear. I believe she had a right to free speech. Did she have a right to deliver a speech at a graduation as the valedictorian of her class, which would have called into question the right of Israel to exist? That's what USC is saying she did not have the right to do. It's an interesting question. I frankly have never been afraid of anybody saying anything, and I would love to see what her speech would have been. But I can tell you that what USC is doing is what universities across this country are having to do. This morning, the president of Columbia University was asked point blank whether or not she felt that Jew hatred should be condemned. And you want to know the tragedy? She equivocated. And
Well,
let me,
that's what they do. I mean, it's
yeah,
remarkable that they do.
and
But
there
I
should
don't
be
know
no
how the question.
equivocation.
It's all how the question's asked.
Yeah,
I guess.
if somebody got up and condemned African Americans, why there wouldn't be a question about their being removed from the giving the major graduation speech. There is a certain sense of solemnity and responsibility, and this is the question which we all have to confront. Had her postings not been so hate-filled, why there probably wouldn't have been a question. But she would not guarantee that she would not say those words at graduation. And so USC said, we're not taking away your diploma nor your right to freedom of speech. You're just not going to be the valedictorian.
No, she's a super smart, adorable. Look at her gorgeousness.
Yeah,
But
I want you to understand. I don't care what a person looks like at any given moment.
no, I
All I
understand.
care about is the content of what they say.
Of course, I was just
And
making the point.
I just want to be clear.
Biomedical engineering, and she has a minor in resistance to genocide. I didn't even know that was a minor.
Yes.
I mean,
all kinds of things at USC.
What?
And let me again point out what we need to define genocide. Just take a look at a classic dictionary definition of genocide. If Israel were committing genocide, there wouldn't be a Palestinian standing. And they have the power to have eliminated the whole population. They could have done it. Israel is not a genocidal state, nor does it practice apartheid. And the fact that these terms are hurled around and frankly abused, it's very disturbing to me.
Why comment on her looks, Mark? I was just saying that she looked because it was a picture of her. That's why. Maybe I shouldn't have. I
No, you're
apologize,
clearly
John.
a sexist, but it's okay, Mark.
Yeah,
We
I'm
love
a
you
sexist,
anyway.
exactly. I've oftentimes said he's handsome. Look at that guy's handsome.
But you know how
It's
careful we have to
absolutely
be
not
now?
something. Jeez, I mean,
All of us have to be careful about our form of expression. And
I
that was
don't
the
want to say
point at
anything for the rest of the
USC.
show, John. Just talk, and I'm going to just sit here.
No,
And
that was the point at USC. The point is you
John, the
have to be
man
careful.
Rothman from Robert Prado. Come on, look at you getting the love. That's really great.
I only have the love because people support the Mark Thompson program, which I urge you to do.
Thank you so much, John. We love having you in, and you're just, one of our families. So I appreciate you so much being here today. You can find John's podcast. It's just a 10-minute offering. You get all you need in a quick visit every day with Around the Political World with John Rothman.
And
That
may I
is
put
the
in a plug,
podcast.
please? We
Yes,
have
sir.
a new podcast. I speak
Oh.
for up to 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day on the Voice of San Francisco. And if you Google the Voice of San Francisco, by the way, your guest, Mark Farrell, the former mayor of San Francisco and now a contender, is part of this process, and he will also be appearing on the Voice of San Francisco. So it's in small letters, the Voice of San Francisco. And there's a podcast label on the top. Just click it on. Every day I comment on something in San Francisco. But let me tell you that the most important single thing is that you support the Mark Thompson program, because that's how we keep this thing afloat. And Mark, you have my full support. I don't care if you're a sexist or not.
What?
Hey, Mark, can I ask you quickly, how's your father doing?
He's not in the best of shape, but I appreciate you asking about him. And what can I say? These are, it's a long time to live. And when you live a long time.
Just give your parents my warmest good wishes and tell them they are in my prayers.
Thank you so much, sir. Great to have you here. John Rothman, everyone, joins us every Wednesday. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.